This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome everyone to the webinar Learning Lab, Fundraising Ideas and Grant Sources. This webinar will be hosted by Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake and staff members, myself, Colia Braun-Greiner, and Anna Awimba, who's the Director of Religious Leadership Development. And so we have focused tonight on we have three speakers. One is our main speaker, which will be Joe Tulin, who will present from Chesapeake Bay Trust. And he is the Program Assistant Outreach and Education at the Chesapeake Bay Trust. And we invite you to take it away. Joe, thank you so much and welcome everyone. Excuse me, I'm going to jump over to that slide set.
Yeah, thank you guys. So yeah, I'm Joe Tulin. I work at the Chesapeake Bay Trust. I've been there for about 1.5 years now. I do want to let you guys know I'm going to be going through the PowerPoint a little bit fast, just so you're aware. I'm here for questions though afterwards, and you can always send me an email if you need any clarification. And I believe you guys will have access to the PowerPoint as well. So next slide. So this is a little bit about the agenda for tonight that I'm going to go over. I'm going to say a little bit about the trust. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. Some of our overall grant program kind of information, and then I'll go into some of the smaller and larger grant programs, as well as some of the application tips and resources that we like to give potential grantees. Next slide. So these are just some pictures from some of our projects. Some of them are in Baltimore City. I think the restoration project in the top left is in Anne Arundel County. But yeah, we just like to show some pictures of some of our projects. So next slide. So many of you guys do know the mission of the Chesapeake Bay Trust. I'm sure many of you have heard of us before, but we're a nonprofit grant-making organization, and basically we're going to, or our mission is to kind of restore the Chesapeake Bay through lots of different programs. So next slide. This is a little bit about where all of our money comes from. The biggest source of our money is the Bay Plate, if you've seen it before. So we get all of that money that comes to us, and we put about 90% of all of the money that we get in right back out the door. So we're really proud of that. And we get a lot of other funds from some of our federal, state, corporate partnerships. We have some private donors. And then there's the tax checkoff, which I'm sure many of you have seen doing taxes. And recently we started the Maryland Outdoor Recreation and Clean Water Fund, which is if you're getting your hunting, fishing, or boating license, you can donate to us. And then we put it all out in grants, and those are the categories of grants on the other side. So next slide. So these are all of the programs that we run at the Trust. I'm not going to go into detail about all of them today, but I just wanted you all to be aware of the programs that we run. Obviously, you can go to our website to find more information, but there are some big categories here: environmental education, outreach and engagement, restoration and science. We have a specific District of Columbia partnership. We have capacity building program, the Chesapeake Conservation Corps, where we place young adults with the host organization for 1 year. And then we have a couple county specific programs as well. But if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me about any of these other programs that I'm not going to go over tonight. Next slide. So going into a little bit about our programs, these are the organizations that we typically fund. So we typically fund nonprofit organizations, faith-based organizations, community associations, civic and service groups, and in some of our grant programs, we will fund some county as well. Next slide. So we have a lot of different types of things that we fund through the trust. These are the things that we typically see funded through our grant programs. So that includes personnel, supplies of any sort to help with the project, and you can see quite a few examples of the supplies there. We'll hire contractual people, or we'll fund for that. So if you need someone to come out and do any contractual work, we'll fund for that. We do fund for travel. Usually we fund at the federal reimbursement rate for travel, which is 57.5 cents per mile right now. And then we also can fund for some other things that some other funders maybe don't always fund for, like room rental and food. And we're very proud of that because in a lot of our work, things like that are needed to make sure that your events or projects go smoothly. So next slide. So now I'm going to talk about mini grants at the trust. And for the trust, mini grants are less than $5,000 generally. And we have a few programs that we run that are mini grants. So next slide. This is going to be the life cycle of a mini grant. So this is what happens when we receive your grant and kind of how we will review it and make decisions. So the first part of that is we do outreach and we open our programs, and we'll post on different sites and reach out to people that we have worked with in the past to let them know that our programs are open. Then we ask that you submit your grant online. For our mini grant programs, we ask for 8 weeks to make a decision. So it does take us about 8 weeks to review everything, run our letters, and send them out. We review them internally. So we have at least 2 people that review each mini grant proposal, and different people at the trust that run different programs have specialties in different aspects. I run a tree planting program, and I have a little bit of background in that space. My coworker, Brianna, who I'm sure some of you know, has a lot more kind of background in community engagement, which is why she runs the community engagement program. We do not do reimbursement funding, so that we do ask that your project doesn't start until you get a decision from us. And that will come in about 8 weeks after you submit your grant application. Once you receive that, you'll get an award letter that you have to sign and send back to us, and then you can start your project. And for mini grants, usually we give you about a year to complete your projects, and then we ask for a final report, just letting us know how the project turned out. So next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Community Engagement Mini Grant Program. This is a program designed really specifically for people that haven't worked with the trust before. And it's a easily accessible program for a lot of people, and we really work with you guys to ensure your success in the program. So this program opens on July 1st of every year. So we actually still have funding for this year. So it hasn't actually closed per se this year, but we will be kind of re-releasing all of the materials in a couple weeks here. You can get up to $5,000 in this program. And there is a little bit of a new thing that we've started with this program, and it's so that we can reach new audiences. So if you've received more than 3 grants from the trust in the past, you're not eligible for this program, unfortunately. However, the reason that we do that is so that we're reaching new people as much as we can. So next slide. However, if you've gotten more than 3 grants from the trust before, we welcome you to be a mentor for the mini grant program. And so this program basically allows organizations like IPC to help mentor other groups through the program. And then once you successfully mentor another group through the program, you can then reapply for this small pot of money, basically. So if you are new to the trust and you haven't applied to grants with us before, we can connect you with another group that has come through the program, and they have a few things that we ask them to do. So we ask that they help you develop your project. We ask that they review your proposal before you submit it and give you feedback on how you could strengthen it to get funding from us. Help with the budget. Our budget spreadsheet can be a little bit overwhelming if you haven't done it before, so I do have a slide to talk about that today as well. And then share any lessons that they have learned from doing grants with the trust. So next slide. So we do have a lot of other mini grant programs. Like I said, I'm not going to go into detail about all of them, but now I'm going to talk about our larger grant programs. These are typically above $5,000. So next slide. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to go through the life cycle of a larger grant now. It is very similar. However, there are some key differences between our mini grants and our large grants that I like to point out. So for our large grant programs, unlike our mini grants, they're not open all of the time. So we usually advertise for 3 months. And that gives us time to do outreach and kind of let people know that the program is open. There is a deadline that's at the end of the 3 months, and it is a firm deadline. So we ask that people apply early. Usually our deadlines are around 4 o'clock on a Thursday, but that's not always the case. After we receive all of the grants, we have a panel of outside experts that come in and review all of the proposals. So these are people that are experts in their field. For some of our grant programs, they could be experts from around the world, so it's not just local, but we do like to find local experts that kind of are familiar with the local geography and any projects that we may fund through the program. Similar to smaller grant programs, there is no reimbursement funding, so we do ask that you don't start your project until you get approved. And usually for our larger grant programs, it takes about 2 months to make a decision. After those 2 months, you will get an award letter and any contingencies that will ask you to send back to the trust, and then you can start your project. For our larger programs, a lot of times they span more than just 1 year. So sometimes we will ask for status reports or progress reports. And that's just so that you keep us up to date on where you're at with your project. And if you need any assistance or have any questions, you can reach out to us and we can help you. And then you'll have to turn in your final report at the end of the project as well. Next slide. So this is one of our biggest grant programs is our Outreach and Restoration Program. This is one that I know a lot of people have applied for with the help of IPC in the past. And it's a really great program to get started. So we recently opened this program again, and the deadline is going to be on August 4th of this year. And this program has 3 different funding levels, which you can see on the screen. So the first track is for outreach projects, and that's up to $30,000. The second track is for restoration projects, which is up to $50,000. And the third track is for projects that include both outreach and restoration, and that's up to $75,000. So this program is open to a lot of the people that we usually fund, nonprofit organizations, community organizations, faith-based organizations. And we have quite a few partners for this program, which you can see across the bottom of the screen. So we work, really closely with folks in Howard County, Harford County, the city of Salisbury, the city of Gaithersburg, and Charles County. But this program does fund throughout the state of Maryland, so you don't have to be in those specific counties to receive funding through the program. Next slide. Another program that we see sometimes, that you guys will apply for is our Watershed Assistance Grant Program. This program is for restoration design projects, basically. This one we also are getting ready to open. It's not open yet, but the deadline is going to be August 13th of this year. This program funds usually about $75,000. for project design, watershed planning, and programmatic development related to those projects. However, if you let us know in advance that you're planning on a larger project, we can work with you, and we funded up to $200,000 for stream restorations in this program. Generally, in this program, we see nonprofit organizations and governments applying. Next slide. So I'm going to take a little bit to kind of show you the online portal for the trust. I know sometimes it's a little bit confusing if you haven't seen it before. So when you log into our online portal, this is the screen that you will see. So the first kind of tab that's opened up is your applications, and you can see any application that you have in progress. And on the right side of the screen, there's a little menu that says show, and right now it says in progress applications. And that can change from in progress or submitted applications. Applied to the trust in the past, you will see your other applications there. And then on the left side of the screen, there's another tab that says view my requirements. And if you receive a grant from the trust, you will click that tab, and that's where you will see anything that you have to turn into the trust. So that could be the signed award agreement, like I had stated before. It could be any contingencies that we need for your grant, so anything additional to make sure that the project will be successful. That's where you'll turn in your final report, and if you have to, a status or progress report. So next slide. This is a little bit of the information that you will see on our online application. So when you want to apply for a grant at the trust, we have some big buckets of information that you will fill out for us. And so on the left-hand side, you see all of those buckets. And then on the picture on the other side of the screen, that's kind of what the first tab looks like. That's applicant information. And you will just have to go through the tabs and fill out the information for your project. Now, not all of the fields in this kind of picture are required. So I know it seems like it's a lot of information, but depending on your project, you might not have to fill out everything. The required fields have a red asterisk next to them so that you know that they are required. But this is the information that we collect in our online application. Next slide. So some of the things that we like to focus on when we're talking about successful grants with the trust. Alignment with funder priorities is really important, and our funders, they all have specific things that they're looking for when they partner with the trust. And this information is in something called our request for proposals, or RFP, that I will go into a little bit in just a minute. But if you read through the RFP, you'll kind of get a feel of what our funders are looking for. A clear focus is really important. I know a lot of times when people are writing grants, everybody has so many amazing ideas, but really being focused on the goals of your project makes it a lot easier for our reviewers to kind of understand where you're coming from. Community buy-in and support is also really important. We really want to see that the work that you're doing in your communities is going to be appreciated, that people want it, and that there's going to be support for maybe maintenance long-term or something like that. Justification of budget and methodology is always important. If there's something in the budget that maybe isn't straightforward about why you're requesting it, we just ask that you tell us why you're requesting it, and usually if it's a sufficient justification, you will get the funding for it. Qualified and appropriate partners is really important. We want to make sure that you're working with the people that are going to help you be successful at your project. And if you ever have questions about who you should be working with or who might be a good person to partner with, we're always there to kind of assist with that as well. The budget is reasonable and accurate. We just want to make sure that your costs make sense. Sometimes quotes may not always be accurate or reasonable. So we just want to make sure that you've kind of looked at all of your options before applying for the trust. project ideas that meet high evaluation standards. So in the RFP that I talked about, we tell you what our high evaluation standards are, and if your project meets those standards, you're more likely to get funded. And then sustainability and transferability is always great. We like to see that this project is going to be sustained long term, and if another group wanted to do a similar project, we'd love to see that they can, you know, kind of come to you for ideas and potentially work with you to, you know, implement their own project in a similar way. So next slide. Other tips for success. Read all of the RFP guidelines and criteria carefully. Like I said, we put that together and it's kind of a long document, but if you follow that information, you know, you're a lot more likely to be successful. Keeping the deadline in mind is really, really important. Our system closes automatically at the time that we set it to. So if the grant closes at 4 o'clock and your, you know, your personal laptop is a minute behind for some reason, unfortunately, we can't accept it if it's late. So we do ask that you apply early. Our grant portal actually works best in Internet Explorer right now, which I know sounds crazy. Most people don't use Internet Explorer anymore, but that is where you will get most of the functions and usually run into less problems. Recording your user ID and password is really important. Unfortunately, we don't have the access to kind of reset your password without going to our grant making site. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer. So I just suggest recording it and writing it down. And then reach out to us for assistance. We're here to help you guys. If you have any questions about your grant program, we're happy to get back to you as quickly as we can. Next slide. I will share with you some of the resources that we have. So I know you guys will have access to this PowerPoint, so the links are here. But we have quite a few webinars that we've put out recently about how to manage awards, how to apply for awards, and one recently about managing awards during COVID-19, because I know there's a lot of challenges that come with that. Next slide. So this is a request for proposals. I just kind of took the top page of it. We've recently redesigned them, so they're a little bit more snazzy, I guess is the best word for it. But this is what the front page will look like, and this is where you'll find all of the information for any of your projects. These are all available online, but if you want to look at specifically the community engagement RFP, there's a link for it on this slide. Next slide. So this is an example of our financial management spreadsheet. So I just wanted to give you a couple of pointers that we see, especially if you haven't worked with the trust before. So you'll see the kind of gray cells at the top, and those automatically calculate based on what you type in under the budget item section in the white below. So for each budget item, you enter what category it is, whether it's a personnel category, supplies, contractual, or any of the other ones on the side. Then you'll put in how many you are requesting and the cost, and the amount requested automatically totals from that and pulls into the cells above it. One of the things I did want to point out on this spreadsheet in particular is the travel line item. We do, like I said, reimburse for travel at the federal reimbursement rate. So the one at 120 actually is not the correct way to fill it out. What you'll want to do is write how many miles you're going to travel and then the cost, which is, like I said, 57.5 cents per mile right now. Next slide. These are a couple examples of some of our required or supporting documents. So not all programs require all of these documents, but these are some of the documents that maybe we will ask for when you're applying for the trust. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are just some examples. One of the questions we get a lot is about our site plan or plant lists, and they really don't have to be that in-depth. You can see the picture kind of on the bottom left-hand side, and it's just a Google image picture with kind of shapes placed on it to show where the plants are going to go. And that's perfectly acceptable for a lot of our programs. So you don't have to go super in depth with it. You know, we're here to make it as easy as we can for a lot of you guys. Next slide. So that was kind of all of my information. Like I said, I did go through it kind of fast. So my contact information is here if you want to reach out by phone or by email. But that's a lot of the information for the trust, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Joe. We really appreciate your time, and all this information will be very helpful to all the people online now watching, as well as the recording that we'll share later. We're going to hold questions until after our next two presenters are on. So you can type questions into the chat box now, or hold your question and speak it out after the presenters are done. So the next in line.
Oh yeah, just one quick.
This conference will now be recorded.
So I'd like to introduce our next speaker. We're now going to go to hear from two Green Team leaders from congregations that have successfully gotten grants from CBT. The first one is a mini grant project that was conducted at Kadampa Meditation Center. And then following that, we'll hear from Joanne Eastlack, and she successfully got a restoration grant, and she'll talk more about that in a minute. But thank you, Rosemary, for joining us, and I want to make sure your webcam is on so that you can be speaking about your experience with the mini grant. Hi, Rosemary.
Howdy, everybody.
So Rosemary, why don't you share what you learned through the mini grant process, and both the opportunities and challenges that you encountered by engaging in this mini grant?
Well, we had determined that we wanted to have a cistern to capture the rainwater from our roof of the building and to water our gardens.
Mm-hmm.
And some of and IPC, you know, this IPC introduced me to this mini grant as a great funding resource. And, you know, most of the people didn't know why a cistern would be valuable at the temple. They didn't even, most people don't even know what a cistern is. And a cistern is really just a really big grain barrel. And so to interest people, I talked about how it would save money by reducing the costs of watering the gardens. And my own personal interest was both from beneficial, you know, would be very beneficial for the garden to use rainwater instead of chlorinated water. I know that, you know, you know, we've spent all this time and money creating these gardens, and it's such a shame they use chlorinated water, as well as a waste of resources. So it was very hard to determine how big a cistern we needed. So we needed help with calculating how much water. That cistern ends up being 450 gallons. And, you know, we actually could use two of them. Actually, when it's really hot, we really could use two, but it makes sense that we only have one, because I later found out that you can only hold water in the cistern for 2 weeks at a time. You're going to empty it out by every 2 weeks to keep the water from getting bacteria in it. The Chesapeake Bay Trust was helpful in helping us understand that when we were playing. And I do want to say, having questions and reaching out to the Chesapeake Bay Trust was super easy and really useful. I found, you know, they're very accessible and very helpful. And another problem we had, I don't know, Cola, if you want to ask me questions or you just want me to talk about it.
Well, yeah, the other question that I had posed was one of the things, what were the things you learned along the way in applying for the grant, in the process of applying for the grant?
Yeah, so what we learned was that we didn't know anything about cisterns other than we wanted to collect rainwater. And so it was very difficult to, actually it was very difficult to get information about cisterns themselves. And I left that up to the engineers because I have no background in determining what would work or what we needed. And so, you know, the water needs to have a filter on it, you know, so there's like a filter. And but in hindsight, what I think I learned was that I would have really preferred something a little more attractive. And we're still thinking of creating, we're trying to decide how to decorate the cistern to make it a little more appealing. As you can see, when everything is leafed out, it's really not that big a deal. But in the winter, it's not that attractive.
Mm-hmm.
But it also is a great place to share information. Having the cistern there is a great resource to share information with people walking by or coming to visit the temple about the value of a cistern and why it's important to have one.
Did you find when you applied the mini grant that the process went fairly smoothly, or did you need some other members of your meditation center to assist you in getting all of the grant application completed? What were some of the details of that?
Yeah, it definitely took a team of people to figure out to delegate the different aspects of the grant. So, you know, somebody who, not me, who can work on the budget, that's really not my strength. I'm more of an organizer person, and so it's important to have, and then we needed someone who can write the grant. I worked on that, but, you know, I think Bonnie was particularly helpful in with some of the, even the editing of that. But we had people, you know, working on getting that all written in a very clear, concise way. And I appreciated what Joe was saying about all the details, because everything he pointed out was, you know, all the things we had to follow to be successful. And
yeah. Would you like to talk a little bit about the other part of the mini grant? Because I have a few slides here of your
yeah, so part of the outreach was part of the agreement was to have an outreach. So we, luckily through that, we offered a rain barrel workshop for people to come, and we had a really nice turnout. We reached out to another congregation nearby, came with a bunch of people, and luckily because of the grant that Interfaith Partners had, we didn't have to buy the rain barrels. They were already purchased, and with all the materials, and Blue Water came and taught everybody how to do it. And we had it was beautiful weather. We had a lot of fun, and everybody's very excited to go home with a free rain barrel as well. So I think it was a great day. It was not hard to organize or arrange. You know, especially reaching out to other congregations. I actually posted on my local, what do you call it, on the local listserv for my community that we were having it, and a lot of people responded to that. So it was a very popular event.
Great, thank you so much, Rosemary. Is there anything else you'd like to say about the mini grant process or the
I think
project?
At times it felt like a lot of work, and other times it didn't. But I think you know, when you look back, it was like it was all worth it. So stay inspired. Don't get discouraged. You know, if you're feeling like it's too much work, just reach out for help. And Interfaith Partners was always cheering me on, and that was so helpful. So
great, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining and sharing your story tonight to inspire others to go forth and do likewise.
yeah, please do. I hope you all go for it.
Well, now we're going to go to our next Green Team leader, and that is Joanne Eastlack from Christ the Servant Lutheran Church. And we'll make sure that Joanne has her webcam on so we can see her. And Joanne's going to talk about the project, which is at the other end of the spectrum, a very large project.
Yes, my name is Joanne Eastlack, and I am the project manager of the community-based restoration implementation of permeable pavers at Christ the Servant Lutheran Church to reduce rainwater runoff. The first hurdle, coming up with a name. That was because your name had to go with what you were doing, and there were some other rules. So that was, and you have to find that name, and that has to be like on every part of the application. Okay, the next slide.
Okay, here we go.
Our church is located at the top of a hill, and we have about 35,000 square feet of blacktop. So because of that, we do produce a lot of runoff water. Our parking lot was in major need of repairs, but we wanted to do something to go with our sustainable developmental goals that we had been working on for the past couple years. So through that and through lots of research with permeable pavers, we decided that was the way we were going to go. And if you see our parking lot, you can see the area where the pavers are going to go. We haven't started it yet, but that's what it's going to look like. We chose that section because we were able, since we're at the top of the hill, that had the best slope, and it also, since it was close to the building, we were able to tie in 3 of our downspouts into this drainage system. And there was also another reason that helped us is that it's very visible to the community. We have a lot of people who use our parking lot. One of the major events is the farmers market of Montgomery Village, which are there all summer, and we have many organizations that use our facility. So what I think helped us there was because of the constant use of our parking lot, so that people could see the project and also learn about it. Next slide. Finding a contractor took a lot of time because of the scope of our project. First of all, we really had to educate ourselves into what we wanted. And we had done that, like, as I said, the diagram there is the diagram of our sustainable developmental goals from the United Nations that we had been working on. So we had already been doing a lot of research on different permeable surfaces before we decided to do this. And always, you can never start soon enough. You really have to define your goals, exactly what you want to do. You really need to know what qualifications are required to do a project of this sort, and finding someone with those qualifications, and then someone who is willing to work with a grant. So it took me at least 2 months, I think, to find a contractor. As Rosemary was saying, the narrative in different parts of the proposal can be overwhelming at times. So the narrative, it was very helpful for me to break it down into smaller sections and to get people to find the people to match up with the right skills to repeat, to answer these questions. Part of it was, I found, is that you really need to read the application several times to familiarize yourself with the format and the structure, and to really sit down and figure out what exactly are they looking for. Because sometimes what you think they're asking for really isn't. Okay. Next slide. One of the important things that I think helped with our application was that we had quite a good support system. I had people working on the application, doing the research. I had people developing, requesting letters, what we call letters of commitment from the congregation. And as you can see, I have two different samples. One is a handwritten sample and another one was a typewritten. What we did is we put out a list of activities that we needed people to commit to. For example, people would be committed to helping with the maintenance. People would be committed to helping with the education process. People would be committed to maybe offering money. So when we put those out, different people volunteered for those and wrote their letters of commitment. One thing I found out is to really stress the diversity of your congregation or your group. And I also felt at the end, one person really needed to go over it and to put it all together, which turned out to be me. And the other important thing was involving our community, of having letters of commitment. Since our church is located in Montgomery Village, we have a strong association with the Montgomery Village Foundation. And of course, with this, we needed to get their architectural control committee to approve what we were doing. But we also worked with the Gaithersburg Library and Interfaith. And I think that I felt we had a good community support. Next page, or next slide. Now the budget scares everybody. It was easier than I thought, because once you put in the numbers, it calculated everything, so I didn't have to worry about that. The difficult part was coming up with what numbers to put in there. Mm-hmm. So I suggest that you read the instructions very carefully. Some of the areas that were difficult to figure out were things like volunteer hours, because you just don't put in the money that you want, you put in other, like gifts in kind. Mm-hmm. And figuring out cash donations. And also, one of the things that I stressed at the end was there's a part of the application which shows a volunteer activity timeline. And so I made sure that that coordinated with the budget. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of little details. I found it sometimes the application was hard to read. I had problems finding all the little lines and the little things. But mm-hmm. In the end, it was a lot of work, but it was definitely worth it.
Great. Thank you so much, Joanne. This was very thorough, and I think you have really shared some ways that other folks can be aware of how to navigate this process. Thank you so much for doing this. And And we're going to open it up now to questions. And the questions are directed to any of our speakers. And we're going to open up the webcams and we'll see if there's questions in the chat. And let's see.
Okay, so a couple of instructions. Everybody can turn on your webcam, and if you're not speaking, put your microphone on.
Hey, would anyone like to ask a question?
I know.
Turn on your
It's like
mic.
everybody's in the background. Hi, everyone. Any questions? If you have a question, just turn on your microphone and you can ask your question, or if you prefer, put your questions in the chat.
Yeah.
And while we're waiting for questions, I just kind of wanted to introduce everyone to, if Bonnie, can you wave so everybody sees who you are? I know when during the presentations, a lot of people mentioned that they got help from, CBT and others. And on the IPC side, Bonnie is our fearless leader in that aspect. I think almost everybody knows her.
Mhm.
So, Bonnie, if you want to share anything about, the next few months between now and the deadline for the CBT grants, maybe just jump in and we'll see if there are any other questions.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good to see all your wonderful faces. So all I would say is on the CBT grant, I don't want to steal Joe's thunder, but the mini grant is a rolling deadline. So that gets funded. It's around the beginning of July every year, and they give that money out all year long. So you can apply anytime, and if you submit an application and the fund has run, that pot of money has run out of funds, you can always save your application, and once it opens again, just resubmit your application. So last I looked, which was probably last week, the mini grant application was still open. So they haven't given all their money away yet this year, and considering it's June, so I think people were a little occupied with other things maybe. But so you can still, so doing a mini grant application now would be great. And then because of the deadlines coming up, if your congregation is thinking that you want to get an application in, now is the time to contact your IPC representative to get you started down the right road. So I know I've talked to many of you already, but there's some new faces on the call. So please feel free to reach out and we'll get you connected with the right people and help you with your application.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. I do see one question directed to Joe, and it is, I think you've mentioned about the CBT grants availability. Are they available only within the state of Maryland?
Yeah, so we have a couple programs that do fund outside of Maryland. However, that depends on if we have a partner, like a federal partner, that can fund outside of the state. Since most of our money comes from the Maryland license plate, most of our programs do only fund in Maryland. Off the top of my head, our Green Streets program can fund outside of Maryland. Our mini environmental education program funds outside of Maryland. And then we have a restoration research program and a DC-based program. So there are some options, but for the most part, it's Maryland projects.
Great, thanks. And one other question I think that you'd be best to answer is, could you say more about what match means on a budget?
Yeah, so match on our budgets, we actually have two different kinds of match. One of them is called a cash match, and one of them is called an in-kind match. So a cash match is if you have money or funds from another funding source maybe, or maybe donations or anything that is basically money that is coming from another source to help you with your project. Our in-kind match is any material or maybe volunteer time that is going to be assisting you with your project. So if you have like a tree planting project and somebody donated shovels and gloves, that would be an in-kind match. Or if somebody is volunteering some of their time to help with designs, that's an in-kind match because it's not a monetary, you know, it's not like a monetary thing, basically.
Thank you.
So there's one more question here from Stu Steinman. How much was the parking lot project grant application for, and how long from the start of the grant work to submission? Joanne.
Initially, we asked for, I think it was like around 80,000, but the grant people actually came back and offered us more money. So our grant is now $119,000. And what was the second part of the question?
How long did it take from the beginning of the idea to your actual submission of the grant? Like about how many months?
Of actually working on the grant itself, it took us, I think it was close to 2.5 months, which is not enough time. I mean, I really pushed it. I mean, we really worked hard. If you're going to do something of that magnitude, you really need to start at least 3 or 4 months. I think it all depends on finding the right contractor. That to me, once we found the contractor, because for a long time I was very disappointed because I just couldn't find anyone that I, felt like we could work with or had the same vision or understood what we were trying to do. And so when I found the right contractor, then everything just zoomed from there because I had all the information I needed, but making appointments and meeting people and delays and waiting for this and that. I mean, all that takes time. And of course, you're rushing, you're trying to do it. And so I think it all depends on how quickly you can get a contractor. And in the meantime, you can be working on all of those other questions, figuring out, we knew what we wanted to do. We already had a knowledge of how permeable pavers worked, how it would benefit our property. But that is something we had been studying and doing for the past year.
Okay, thanks, Joan. And it sounds on average that you want to set aside at least 8 months, and in some cases more to allow for delay. I'm going to get to some other questions. One question for Rosemary, I think. How involved is the ongoing maintenance of the cistern? And please turn off your microphone if you're not speaking.
Yeah, the cistern is not a high maintenance thing. It really manages itself. The main thing is you divert the water in the winter because you don't want to have a frozen bucket of water. So you want to empty the cistern out and divert it so when it rains, it doesn't fill up in the winter. And then you got to remember to turn it back on in the spring when you're ready to start using the water. I mean, really about this time of year, because if we have a lot of rain, you don't need to fill up your tank to use the water. And then the other area that needs management is sometimes the filter. The water from the roof will go through a filter. But that's about it as far as I know. And then you have to have a hose so that we got soaker hoses to use, to fill up We don't have a pump with our cistern, so I would imagine if you had an electric pump to pump out the water, that would, require some kind of maintenance as well because it's a motor and things like that. But this is just gravity driven. So all you need is a hose to get the, to water the plants. And I thought a soaker hose is really valuable for that. And it's very inexpensive.
Thanks.
So those are the main points. It's not bad at all.
Thanks. Another question I think Deborah was asking, this is probably for Joe. What's the difference between personnel and a contractor? And then the second half of the question is, does a mini grant cover the cost of a project manager or an administrator?
Yeah, so if it's a personnel line item, it's basically to cover costs of anybody that works for your organization that is going to help out with the grant. So that could be, executive director hours, outreach hours, anything like that. Contractors are someone who does not work for your organization that is going to do work for you. So that could be anybody that's going to help you make your design plans or maybe has expertise in other areas to help you out. Our mini grants, we don't have like a specific, rule about covering kind of a project manager or administrator for many of our programs. I will say, going along with that, that we do want to see that most of the money is going kind of to implementing your project. However, if there is someone that's helping you write the grant or that is going to be doing a lot of the work, obviously those costs can be covered by the grant. But our mini grant program really is not a whole lot of funds, so we do prefer to see it kind of going towards the project itself if possible.
Great. Somebody had a question, and she says for later, recommendations for resources to look for available grants. And I think one place she could start is go to cvtrust.org for information about what's open and what isn't. So cvtrust.org. And after this webinar, we'll go ahead and send that link in the follow-up information. But then if anyone else has ideas of other sources, please feel free to chime in before Kalia closes up the session.
Yeah, I have a couple that I can recommend also that are outside of the trust grants. So one of the places that a lot of organizations will put out if they're doing funding is on the Chesapeake network, if you've heard of it. That site also does post like events and other things, but sometimes there are funding opportunities there. And the other thing that I can suggest is the Bay Brief, which is a weekly newsletter put out by the Chesapeake Bay program. And they have a whole section for funding opportunities in that newsletter that goes out every week.
This is Bonnie at IPC. We also have a shareable document that has different grants that are available. There's some smaller grants that are available in different locations. So like Anne Arundel County has Unity Garden grants that are up to $1,000. Baltimore has Parks and People does $500 to $1,000 grants. So there are some small grants that are available in different locations. So you can reach out to your IPC outreach person and we can try to help you connect with those. And then while I'm talking, I just want to address something that Rosemary said about her cistern and not liking the way it looks. Cisterns come in all different shapes and sizes. So we can find one that's right for you. And actually, even at one congregation home and friends meeting, they custom designed theirs because they wanted to have seating. So they have their cisterns are actually built into a bench so that people can sit on the bench while they're in their garden. So where there's a will, there's a way. And then Rosemary left, but I could show her We've had some congregations put like lattice work around their cisterns so that they're not just standing out there. So it just depends on, you know, what their space. There was only certain ones that would fit in that space. So it really, there's constraints by, you know, where the location is going to be, what kind of cistern can actually fit there. But we can make that prettier for her. We'll work on that.
Yeah, some of them are flush against the wall. They can be, you know, straight up and down the wall, and also even some of them come in different colors to match the bricks. your building is the same color. So, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us on this learning lab and especially thank Joe Tulin from CBT and Rosemary Flickinger from Kadampa Meditation Center, and thank you, Joanne Eastlack from Christ the Servant Lutheran Church. I'm just going to close out with a prayer as we go forth and do this important work together. Holy Spirit, source of life, creator of the universe, guide all of our thoughts and actions as we go forward. Keep us from despair, open our minds and hearts, and inspire us to act wisely as we restore and heal God's creation. Amen. Thanks, everybody. Bye.